mode, and even this morning some villages and houses are still cut off through flooding. And dependent upon the level of rain that we'll get over the next probably 48 hours, will define whether we can move from this emergency mode into recovery mode. But emergency mode we are still in at the moment, and that is our priority. Now, the first thing to say is that we are thankful that there has been no loss of life. Nothing is more important than we preserve life, and so we are pleased that nobody in Monmouthshire has lost their life through the events of the last few days. But our hearts do go out to those whose houses and indeed whose businesses have been damaged by the flooding. It must be devastating for those who find themselves with their houses ruined. And I can find it difficult to imagine the position of people who have had this happen to them in the past. But this is probably the worst flooding that we've had in more than 40 years. But thanks to the defences that were installed following those floods of, 1979, there has been some relief for many of the homes through the defences that were built there. But on behalf of, I'm sure, of everybody here, particularly all members of Cabinet and all other members of Council, I'm sure you would want me to extend our great thanks to all members of this Council, from the Chief Executive through to operatives on the ground. They have worked tirelessly for hours and hours on end over the last few days to do what they can to keep our residents safe. But it's not just the council officers, obviously, it's the emergency services who have been there. All the emergency services have been on hand, and we've had help from people like Mountain Rescue as well. And I'm sure that the work of these organisations has helped prevent even worse damage around the county. But we're still in emergency mode, and we won't be able to move to recovery mode until we are sure that the dangers have been passed. Now, the leader is not here, as you will have noticed, neither is the Chief Executive. Both have been called down to a meeting with the First Minister to discuss the flooding and what help the Welsh Government can give in order to get us back to some form of normality. But it's quite clear that after the emergency is over, the recovery period is going to take months and probably years. It will be of great cost to many individuals, businesses, and it will be of great cost to this council. So we are going to have to do some important work to see how we get through all of this. We are trying to maintain normal services throughout the council, but you will appreciate that the priority is to deal with the emergency. And so inevitably, there has been some delay in our normal services that we provide. But it is good to see, for instance, that waste services are out there and are collecting. And our thanks go to, again, to all of our officers who have done and continue to do sterling work. Okay, let's move on to the business of the day. First of all, there are apologies for absence, and the Chief Executive is not a member of Cabinet, but Peter Fox, apologies from him. And other than that, I don't think there are any other apologies from members, but I'm now going to ask members to introduce themselves. So if we start, Richard.
Richard John, Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Mon Life. Sarah Jones, the Cabinet Member for Social Justice and Community Development.
Paul Jordan, Cabinet Member for Governance and Law.
Bob Greenland, Deputy Leader.
Phil Murphy, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Annie Jones, Cabinet Member for Social Services.
Jane Pratt, Cabinet Member for Infrastructure and Neighbourhood Services.
Jo Watkins, Leader of the Liberal Democrat Group.
Thank you, Bob. Frances Taylor, Leader of the Independent Group.
Oh, it's not working, but Councillor Dimitri Petruni, Leader of the Labour Group.
And we're joined also by two other members of Council. Could you introduce yourself?
Not sure. Oh, there we are. Sheila Woodhouse, Member for Grovefield Ward in Abergavenny.
Maureen Powell, Member for Castle Ward in Abergavenny.
Thank you, and we've got a number of officers with us today, so perhaps if you're taking part in the meeting, you could introduce yourselves at the appropriate time. Right, we move on to the first item on the agenda, or the third item on the agenda really, which is considering the reports. And the first one, the consideration of the final revenue and capital budget proposals. Now, there is a supplementary report that came out in addition to the full agenda. And I think that is the report that Councillor Phil Murphy will be talking to. Phil.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. And you'll be aware that, got a bit of a back on. Over the last 4 years, we've saved over £23 million from the Council's budget amidst reduced Welsh Government funding. In the coming year, in addition to the pay and pension increases of 1.5 million, we face specific pressures of some 9.7 million, although this was reduced to 9.5 million during the period of consultation. Thus, we had to find some £11 million worth of savings or additional income. Savings were also increased by 529,000 during that period. With the anticipated funding, savings, increases in charges, additional properties coming into charge for council tax and the flexible use of capital receipts, we went out to consultation with a funding gap of 1.178 million. That assumed a council tax increase of 4.95% and a 2% cut in ISB. During the consultation period, we, the WLGA and others, lobbied the Welsh Government for a funding floor that, if provided, could have resulted in an increase in AEF from the 3% awarded in the provisional settlement. It now seems unlikely that this will be forthcoming. Work has continued on closing the gap. However, Cabinet made the decision not to impose the individual schools' budget cut, and this was relayed to schools at the Schools Budget Forum. Schools will also benefit from full funding of pay and pension increases, and the loan scheme to schools will be offered to schools which decide to take it up. Some clubs and associations have made us aware that the adoption of the Ealing ruling on VAT has disadvantaged them, in that they have lost the ability to reclaim VAT on leisure facilities. We have accepted a £25,000 pressure, as I should say, as a result. We've also taken account of the research done regarding DFGs. As a result, we will follow the decision taken over the last few years to put a further 300,000 on top of the floor in the base budget. The base will now be set at 900,000, which will need to be reviewed annually, along with all other capital expenditure. In respect of the capital programme, we are still committed to our 21st century schools policy and to enhance our leisure centres, as was done in Monmouth, together with its other elements. There will also again be help for businesses relating to high business rates. There is also an ongoing commitment to ensure that staff are paid no less than the Living Wage Foundation living wage. In addition, there are pressures regarding incremental pay, especially regarding lower pay spines, which have had to be accommodated. There is further pressure on the MTFP relating to the LGA pay award, yet to be confirmed, and the need to know if any assistance will be forthcoming with any of the agreed settlement. it is essential that UK and Welsh governments ensure that funding for the award is forthcoming when the substance of the award is announced. The pressures in children's and adults' care, together with those relating to children with additional learning needs, will be met. Currently, there are increased pressures in children's services having to be coped with, and that will inevitably cause further problems in the coming year. Issues in the passenger transport unit will also have to be monitored closely. The present position with the funding gap is that there is still a shortfall of 497,000, and officers are still working on closing that gap. It is to be hoped that some assistance will come from the final settlement later in February, but as I said earlier, that seems unlikely. If there is additional support from Welsh Government in the final settlement, it will enable us to close that gap much more easily, and potentially, depending on what it is, be able to revisit the proposal to increase council tax by 4.95%. But again, everything depends on that final settlement. Indeed, the medium-term prognosis remains of concern, with no indication of future grants, and work continues on the MTFP to keep it relevant. Reserves, especially earmarked reserves, will reduce in the year, therefore increasing pressure unless we can top them up. The general reserve stands at 7 million, which is the mid-range of the prudential level required. So, Deputy Leader, can I take this opportunity here to thank all senior officers and their staff, and especially Peter Davis, for the considerable amount of work done in the most challenging of budget rounds.
Thank you, Phil, and I would also like to reiterate my thanks to Peter and to all the staff who have been working on this for many, many months. The most difficult round of budget proposals that we've ever had to reach. And can I also thank you, Phil, for the way that you've worked with officers in bringing these proposals to us, and in also for the diligence in going out and speaking to the public on as many occasions. I think you've done 12 sorts of public meetings altogether, giving members of the public every opportunity that we can to consult on this on these budget proposals. But as you say, we find ourselves in a very difficult position of bringing forward to this cabinet meeting a deficit of some 495,000. I think I'm right in saying that we've never been in that position at this final meeting before.
That's absolutely right, we haven't.
Yeah.
I could just add there, Deputy Leader, that a lot of that is to do with the fact that because of the general election, a lot of the figures came late. We weren't able to be as precise with the provisional settlement because that came late. Clearly, we haven't had the final settlement yet. That's expected later on in this month, as I said in my address. So, everything is pretty well up in the air at the moment.
Yeah, much appreciated. But obviously, we would not be in this position had we received a better settlement from the Welsh Government. We find ourselves yet again at the bottom of the funding pile. And even now, we would hope that if we can get a better settlement, if a floor is put in at 4%, for instance, then we might be able to bridge this gap that we have at the moment, and also perhaps look again at the level of funding for council tax, which we recognise as being very hard on us. But we also recognise that within our social services, there are pressures there which we would very much like to have met had our funding been better than it is. Before I open it to members, Peter, would you like to say anything at this point?
Only briefly, just to, again, appreciate the thanks being passed on by yourself, Deputy Leader, and Phil as Cabinet Member for Resources. I guess it's key just to highlight the collective effort that's brought these proposals to this stage. It goes way beyond me, and in terms of colleagues from the leadership team, directorate management teams, finance teams and beyond, let alone all the extensive engagement that's taken place with members as well. So that offer of thanks is not just to me, but goes far and beyond. I'll respond separately and, if needed, in responding to any questions that may come.
Okay, well, I'll open it up to members of Cabinet. Anybody wish to come in at this point? Richard.
Just to say, I'm really pleased that the 2% proposal we brought forward for schools, that proposed 2% reduction has been dropped. We were very clear at the time that that was something we did not want to bring forward, but we were in such a difficult position, we felt we had to. But I'm really pleased that that has been dropped. We've got a record of protecting school budgets, and we've been very clear that we want young people to have the very best start in life. And I'm really pleased that we have been able to do that this time. But I do feel it's grossly unfair that there is such a differential between the worst funded and best funded councils, from 3% to almost 5.5%, because the Welsh Government is effectively putting some local authorities in a position where it is so much more difficult to be able to protect school budgets. And in terms of equality of opportunity, you know, we've said in Monmouthshire we want every young person to have the best start in life. Well, how are you offering every young person in Wales equality of opportunity, the best possible chance to succeed in life, if you're making it so difficult for some authorities to protect school budgets? And given it makes up such a large proportion of our council's expenditure, you really are putting some councils in a really difficult position. So I hope they do agree to a floor, but in terms of equality of opportunity, I think Welsh Government have really got a lot to answer for in terms of their distribution of funding to councils.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, I agree with everything you say. Right, Dimitri, I think you have put a question, have you? Would you like to put it now?
Okay, sorry, yeah. Sorry, I thought Francis was first. Yeah, two questions. Just for clarification, the draft budget that we released on the 20th of December, did that include the better than we expected Welsh Government settlement? We were planning for a 1% increase and we got a 3%.
Straight answer, no.
So it didn't include the extra £1 million. So
it helped to bridge the 1.178 million gap.
So we
put 2.08 million in anticipated, 2.8 came in with the final settlement. So that difference helped to bridge the 1.178 million gap.
And just to be clear, so the Welsh Government released that budget on the 16th of December. That we knew what we were getting on the 16th of December. But we released the draft budget on the 20th of December saying that we didn't have that money, even though we knew we had that money.
But all the papers went out on the 12th.
Or just before on the general election.
No, all the papers for cabinet went out on the 12th. So then we got the settlement, and then we got the thing. So that difference helped us in amongst everything else. It wasn't just that helped us reduce that 1.178 million gap.
So the extra Welsh Government funding has stopped school cuts. Okay, cool. And the next question was, what was the previous housing completion forecast and expected revenue?
Well, in addition to the original calculations, it was an extra 50 properties, 322,000.
322. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Francis, I think you have a couple of questions. Would you like to put those?
Yes, please, Deputy Minister. Minister? No,
Deputy
that's elevated you, isn't it? Deputy Leader. Thanks, Bob. So I think that certainly from the point of view of the Adult Select Committee, we'd like to note that we're really pleased to see that Cabinet has, decided to maintain the 900,000 of the disabled facilities grant. We saw a lot of evidence that that does make a real difference. So I think that that's really helpful. Pleased to see that and wish to note it. are also really content to see the council paying the living wage as from April 2020 of £9.30. I think that's also really positive in terms of ensuring that we are all our direct employees at the very least are in receipt of the living wage. So just a couple of questions then. In fact, I know Dimitri's just drawn my attention to an article in the Guardian about social care in Monmouthshire, and we've had this discussion and debate, you know, and I don't think there is an easy answer, but I think it would be, we probably do need to note all the unbrokered care that we have in the system, and if we were to broker that, we'd be an awful lot more than 400 and whatever thousand you said in difficulty, and I just think that it would be really helpful if we had a very long-term conversation about what we are going to do about that, because we can't, you know, we can't keep plugging those gaps with
Excuse
one-off
me,
funding.
Francis, is this a question or
Yes.
an address?
Yes. No, it's not a question of the NHS per se, Phil. It's a question to ask, to request, really, that we do start to have that conversation at council, not just in select. But the thing I wanted to really clarify, Phil, is you mentioned just around help for small businesses, but I noted the intention to disinvest and save 37,000 from the top-up from discretionary business rate relief. I was a little confused by that then. So can you clarify where we are with that? Because I think that's going to have a specific impact on some of our high streets, if that is the case.
Last year, we had a grant of 63,000 from Welsh Government. We decided that it was prudent to top that up, and we topped it up to 100,000. During the year, we only had 2 claims. So the amount, we took the judgment at the time that the amount of 63,000, which has been repeated by Welsh Government, was more than sufficient. So we therefore used that 37,000 elsewhere.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Can I just first of all thank you, Francis, for recognising the value of the DFGs, which you're quite right, have enabled a lot of people to stay in their own homes and remain independent for a lot longer. So that was something we brought in, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, and has been very useful. Also, thanks again for the mentioning the living wage, which we will continue to pay. And in fact, we have been paying the living wage in this council for probably several years. I can't remember how many, but we have continued to pay that for several years. Penny Jones, Councillor Penny Jones, would you like to come in on anything at all on that?
Well, just I haven't been here for so long. Yes, Francis originally asked about the budget for domiciliary care in particular. I think you mentioned, well, obviously it's something that, you know, it concerns us greatly and is talked about a great deal. In relation to the pressure on the domiciliary care hours, we've used the winter pressure funding to reduce it from 900 to 700 hours, although that has now gone down to 500 to 600 hours. It does fluctuate a little. And we're looking to implement Turning the World Upside Down from July, which is incredibly innovative and which we're anticipating will maximise the potential of efficiency in the whole service as part of the strategy to manage the pressure and the demands moving forward. But as you can imagine, it is a constant source of concern and discussion. And, you know, there are ways, it would take a very long time to answer that question in full. But it is an ongoing problem, and those two things, the domiciliary care and the Turning the World Upside Down, are part of the answers at this moment.
Thank you, everyone. So we move to the recommendations. We have, as I said originally, been in considerable consultations over this budget through the meetings that Phil has had with interested parties, and we bring these recommendations to Cabinet at the moment. I'll just go through them. To one, that we consider the responses, which we have done, to the revenue budget and the capital programme. That Cabinet acknowledges that the final budget proposals look to support the priorities of the Council and specifically seek to recognise in full all pay and pension-related spending pressures in our schooling system and the increasing demand placed on children's social care services, adult social care, and our children with additional learning needs budgets. And that, at the present, unless we hear anything from the Welsh Government that might help us, that a 4.95% increase in the Band D equivalent council tax for the county continues to be used as the planning assumption in the budget model and to apply for county purposes in 2021. 4, that Cabinet approves the revised saving and pressure proposals, updated following public consultation, scrutiny, and more up-to-date information being made available since the draft proposals were released on consultation on the 20th of December last year. 5, that Cabinet recognises the risks concerning an absence of a funding for in the final local government settlement and further steps needing to be taken to manage the remaining deficit budget if this was to materialise. That Cabinet notes the movements anticipated in respect of earmarked reserves during 2021, culminating in forecast earmarked reserve balances of 5.29 million at the end of 2021. That Cabinet approves changes to the draft capital budget proposals and programmes for 2021 as outlined in paragraph 329. That Cabinet recommends Council to dispose of assets identified in the exempt background paper at best value. That Cabinet considers the responsible financial officer's report on the robustness of the budget process and the adequacy of reserves issued under the provisions of the Local Government Act 2003, and that Cabinet adopts the responsible financial officer's report on prudential indicators. And finally, that Cabinet approves the following. Further work is undertaken to develop a balanced medium-term financial plan over the 3-year period 21-22 to 23-24, and regular review of the MTFP is to ensure it remains up to date, and that includes an assessment of evidence-based pressures and risks, underlying modelling assumptions, and the ongoing affordability implications of the corporate plan. So those, I'm sorry for the length of those, but I thought it was important on a report such as this to go through each one. So those are what we are voting on. Members, are you in favour? All in favour. Thank you, Phil. And we move on to the Countryside Access Improvement Plan, which I suppose follows on from the 2000 Countryside Plan, which came to be known as the Right to Roam. So I'll hand over to Richard John.
Thank you very much. So the recommendation in this report is to approve the Rights of Way Improvement Plan. It updates the first plan, which was signed off in 2007. And this has gone through a thorough consultation process, firstly to inform the development of the document, and then there was a further consultation on the draft plan towards the end of last year. And the report sets out some of the key themes that came up in that consultation process. It sets out our commitment to a well-maintained network of public rights of way across the county. And it's aligned with our active travel commitments, with our plans for green infrastructure. And it's also aligned with the climate change emergency that the authority declared last year, because we want to make it easier for people in Monmouthshire to be able to travel from one community to another, and to lead more physically active lives, and to do so in a way that is less reliant on travelling by car. So this is part of a greater goal of enabling people to travel between various communities, and I'll come on to some of the some of the projects that are mentioned in the report in a moment. It sets out a number of objectives and ways in which we can achieve some of those goals by working more effectively with town and community councils, by making better use of a network of volunteers, and sets out our commitment to encouraging healthy and active lifestyles. The process also flagged up some public rights of way that need some work, either because there are obstructions or areas that have become overgrown that need clearing back. It also sets out a commitment to improving marketing for some of our public rights of way, so particularly around public rights of way in the Wye Valley, for instance. It sets out some specific commitments in terms of enabling wheelchair use for some routes, developing the cycle path from Usk to Little Mill, introducing a path along the old railway line between Caldecott and Caerwent, and some other cycle paths, Tintern to Wentwood, and also improving some walking routes. So in Monmouth, for instance, there are parts of the town where it's very difficult to get to the town centre because there isn't a clear walking route. And also some improvements to towpaths along the Monmouthshire and Brecon Canal. So I think that commitment of making it easier for people to get outdoors and enjoy the fantastic countryside we've got in this county, I think that is really important, and I particularly want to pay tribute to the work of officers, particularly Matthew and Ruth, for the work they've done, particularly on that consultation, which, if you see the annexes, was really robust. So thank you very much.
Yes, I would add our thanks to Ruth Rourke and Matthew Lewis on the report and all the work that you've done. Is there anything either of you would like to add at this stage?
Thank you. Just the one thing perhaps to add is just that as well as the improvement plan document itself, we're also asking you to approve the update of what is now called the Countryside Access Policy Protocol and Operational Management Guide, which is formerly the A to Z. So that's effectively a public statement of our the priorities that Council has already set in terms of how we prioritise rights of way issues, because obviously issues do exceed demand. It also sets out our policy and some of the legal background to individual issues. So that's quite an important document which is there ready for the public to understand the way in which we do the day-to-day operational management of the network.
Members, any questions?
I just wanted to briefly come in to say what a joy it is to read consultation responses that were so positive to the document that went out. It's obviously a testament to the work that you put in. But, you know, it really is good to see that and to have that endorsement from so many partners, because that gives us the solid basis for working with them going forward. So, yeah, well done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We move to the vote. And first of all, the recommendation, and following Matthew's comments, note that it does include the Operation Management Guide in the recommendation, which is that we approve the finalised Countryside Access Improvement Plan, Rights of Way Improvement Plan, and the Countryside Access Policy, the Protocol, and the Operational Management Guide. All in favour? Thank you. Thank you, both of you. So we move on to the corporate plan. Now, had the leader been here, he would have led on this. The corporate plan was developed at the beginning of this council term, and we're now halfway through that council term, and it is therefore appropriate that we should have had a review, a mid-term refresh, as the report says. So I'm going to hand over now to Paul Jordan to take us through this. Paul.
Thank you very much. Our corporate plan converts our purpose and high-level ambition into a tight and understandable whole authority strategic plan, and makes sure that it works programme over the medium term It contains the 22 high-level commitments we will deliver by May 2022. The midpoint of the current Council's term of office presents the opportunity to take stock and identify whether any of the programmes of work needed to be amended to reflect changes in the external environment or policy positions subsequently adopted by Council. For example, the motions that have been passed, such as the unanimous decision to declare a climate change emergency. This work began last summer and has dovetailed with the work of the development of the budget to ensure our ambition is afforded the necessary funding. The only significant changes at the level of the 22 is the broadening of the commitment on renewable energy to a broader ambition on decarbonisation and climate change. Underneath that sits around 80 more detailed commitments. There have been amendments to some actions. Some new activity has been incorporated. This includes our commitment to town centre redevelopment in Usk and Chepstow, developing more support for rural businesses, and move to the next phase of the Chepstow Transport Study. Some of these things identified in the first version of the plan have been delivered. These are left in the document but marked as completed and include the new school at Monmouth. Many more projects will be added to the completed list over the next 12 months. Monmouthshire is the lowest funded local authority in Wales per head of population. The mid-term refresh of the corporate plan shows that despite this, we continue our commitment to an ambitious programme of delivery, and that will benefit the current and future generations of Monmouthshire residents and businesses. Deputy Leader, I'll then take you to the recommendations. Shall I read those, or do you want to read those?
Well, shall we just open it up for the moment, and then we'll come back to we'll open it up for the moment and then come back to the recommendations. And we have Matthew Gatehouse with us as well, one of the authors, and who has obviously headed this midterm review. Matthew, is there anything you want to add at this stage?
No, I think there's a sort of fairly comprehensive overview, so no, nothing to add at this point.
Okay, thanks. Can we open it up for members of Cabinet? Any comments? Jane.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader. I welcome this document, but I would just like to make a couple of points regarding climate change. And whilst this council is working very hard to address our climate change emergency, I have been very disappointed by the lack of ambition and lack of strategy that we've seen from the Welsh Government, especially in the light of what's happened in the last few days. And I really do hope that they accelerate this and that we see a lot more action from them in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Anyone else? Richard.
Just to flag up some of the changes from the earlier versions of this document, really in my area, I wanted to particularly note the completion of some of the projects we've been working on, particularly the redevelopment of Monmouth Comprehensive School, which is a phenomenal, fantastic new home for that school. And obviously the document retains our commitment to ensuring that all 4 secondary schools in Monmouthshire are delivered to that standard. There's also a couple of additions to the document, including the redevelopment of Caldecott Leisure Centre, following the success of Monmouth and the fact that we're looking at a trebling of members at that centre since it was renovated a year ago. That's the standard we want to roll out across the county. So we're looking at renovating Caldecott Leisure Centre next, and obviously then rolling that out to Abergavenny and Chepstow. And we've also included some slight changes on our strategy for additional learning needs. So that's included in the document as well.
You're quite right, Jane, to mention the issues of climate change. And Paul, as you said in your introduction, we have, in light of the climate emergency that we have recognised in this county, and this council, we have made changes to the document in the light of that, which is very important. So we have the recommendations. Would you want to read them out?
Yes.
Go on then.
Yes, okay. Give me something to do. The Cabinet endorse the corporate plan prior to the approval by Council, and that Cabinet endorse the adoption of the objectives contained in the plan as the Council's wellbeing objectives and improvement objectives in accordance with the requirements of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act and the Local Government Wales Measure 2009.
All in favour? Thank you. So, Richard, it's over to you again.
Thank you. So firstly, I want to make it absolutely clear that we remain completely committed to outdoor education. We believe that outdoor education is an important part of young people's experiences going through school, and it's a service we want to retain and make more sustainable into the future. We were a part of the Gwent Outdoor Education Service, which was disbanded last year because a number of local authorities had, over the years, withdrawn their support for that service. Newport withdrew in 2013, followed by Torvine and Blaenau Gwent. So between the four authorities, we jointly ran 3 sites, Hillston Park, Gilwern and Talabont. We're now looking at one local authority running 2 sites. And the report shows very clearly that that is putting some pressures on the sustainability of that service, because both sites are in need of some significant investment to maintain the offer. And the provision that we do have between Gilwern and Hillston Park is really impressive. Adventure Days as part of the Monmouthshire Games, which is going on this week. Breaks for carers groups, disabled children, support packages for schools, support for children with complex needs. It's a key part of the curriculum for many of our schools. And we also offer the Duke of Edinburgh Award through our outdoor education service. And of all the local authorities in Wales, we're really proud that we have the highest participation rate for Duke of Edinburgh, which is something I think we can be really proud of. Our outdoor education service is looking at taking a more commercial approach and exploring other opportunities to maintain that service. But clearly there is a difficult decision to take in the future to ensure that we maintain that we can keep our outdoor education service going. We don't want to withdraw from it. So to keep it, to protect it, to enable us to invest more in outdoor education, we need to make it more sustainable. So today we're not deciding to close a site, but we are recognising the need to move to a more sustainable model, which may in future require consulting on a move to invest in a single site. That would be a very difficult decision for us, but recognising how important outdoor education is to the life chances of young people, offering them leadership skills, valuable life skills, it's something we may need to consider. So this sets the ball rolling on, it updates members on where we are in terms of outdoor education, and you can see from the figures that keeping these 2 sites running has become increasingly challenging. So we'll be considering how we can make that service more sustainable, where the investment is needed, and obviously any final decisions we will consult and have a further decision to make, perhaps.
Thank you, Richard. We've got Marie with us, Marie Bartlett, the Finance and Resources Manager for Mon Life. Is there anything you would like to add, Marie, to that at this stage? Thank you, Maria. It's unfortunate that your microphone wasn't working, and so people at home might not have heard that, but essentially you were outlining the report that we've got in front of us. And I noticed also that Councillor Petruni's microphone wasn't working either. Could we ask facilities if they could have a look at the sound system in here and try and ensure that we have all the microphones working by the time we get to the next council meeting at least? Right, any comments from members? Yep, Penny?
I'd just like to make a general comment that I'm proud to be part of a local authority that supports outdoor activities and education, and to me it's a very important part that we play in their education as a whole. And I am somewhat reassured to hear you say that we are really looking into all kind of sustainable models of delivery, not just thinking along one line. So, I mean, we may have to accept the inevitable in the end. Perhaps it will be the inevitable, but let's hope that we can find alternatives. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Can I just draw your attention to recommendation 2.2, which I think needs a bit more clarity to it. Richard made it quite clear in his address that if there was a need for rationalisation, that would be taken later. But I don't want anybody to think that 2.2 of the recommendations means that this might not take place without further report coming to Cabinet. So what I would like to do is to add to that recommendation the following. If officers in time recommend site rationalisation, a further report will be presented to Cabinet. Now, I'm sure that's exactly what they intended to do, but I just didn't want there to be any misunderstanding when somebody might read that. So the recommendation is that for 2.2, and the first one is members note the current overspending position for 1920 of £95,000 and the potential for the service to have the same level of overspending in 2021. This is not included within the medium-term financial pressures list for 2021. So with those being the recommendations, members, are you in favour? Thank you.
Thank you. So this report proposes to make some minor changes to the way in which we fund our schools. Our schools budget forum is a statutory body that oversees and proposes changes from time to time to the funding formula for schools. Now, at one of their meetings last year, it was proposed to set up a working group to review elements of the funding formula to ensure that we're distributing money to schools as fairly as we possibly can. There were a number of areas that were proposed, and there was a thorough consultation on proposed changes in concerning free school meals, payroll, advertising, administration, and for secondary schools, foreign language assistance. These were consulted on widely, not just with the forum, but with head teachers, with school governors. So we're proposing to put these changes in place. There's the detail of exactly what these changes mean. There's no overall reduction in the amount of money we give to schools. It's just tweaking these elements such as payroll, advertising, administration, just to ensure that the distribution of funding is as fair as it possibly can be.
Thank you, Richard. Nikki Wellington is here, the author of the report. Nikki, do you want to say anything at this point?
Just one thing to add, obviously the effects per individual school were laid out in one of the appendices. It's just for members to note that that was actually based on the January 19 PLAS figures, which is what we had available at the time. Obviously, as schools move forward and pupil numbers change, there may be a slight change in terms of the individual effect on schools, but we have to choose a point in time to make those recommendations.
Thanks, Nikki, for that clarification. Any comments, members, questions? No? In that case, we'll move to the recommendation, which is simple. To approve the proposed changes to the school funding formula as detailed in section 3 of the consultation document in Appendix 1. All in favour? Thank you. Church Trust Funds Investment and Fund Strategies. This is a regular annual, I think, isn't it? Report that we get. So I'll hand over to Phil Murphy.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. And that's the recommendations are that proposed investment and fund strategy for 2020-21 for the Monmouthshire Farm School Endowment Trust and the Welsh Church Fund be approved, with delegated responsibility for execution and administration of that treasury management to the head of finance, who will work with the investment and fund strategy. It also approves the grant allocation to the beneficiaries of the Welsh Church Act Fund of 210,000, and that will be distributed along the population shares as per the usual formula set in 2010 census. 2.5 actually relates to a meeting that was held in January, and I can confirm that that meeting took place and that the necessary part of that recommendation was carried out. And it's also to endorse the Welsh Church Fund principles, and they're all in Appendix 6. And that is as per the current procedures. As you're aware, the authority acts as sole trustee for the Welsh Church Fund and has responsibility for the financial arrangements for the Monmouthshire Farm School Endowment Trust, and we have to approve the investment and fund strategies for them every year, and also to set that grant allocation for the Welsh Church Fund. As has been the case for the last 4 years, we have independent Treasury advisors in Arling Close. They were awarded the contract in March 16 for that 4 years, and there's a 2-year period now being implemented. So Monmouthshire County Council, the Welsh Church Act Fund, and the Monmouthshire Farm School Endowment all benefit from the advice of Arling Close. So as I said, Deputy Leader, this is a reinforcement of what's been going on quite successfully for some time.
Thank you, Phil. Do any officers wish to make any comments?
Nikki does.
Nikki, do you? No? Right, okay. Any comments from members? Okay. In your opening remarks, Phil, you pretty well went through all the recommendations that are there, so I don't intend to repeat them. So we will vote on all the recommendations. All in favour? Thank you. And with that, we move on to the final item, the Welsh Church Fund Working Group. Who normally takes this? Peters. All right, okay, I'll take it. Right, we have in front of us a number of applications from the meeting of the funding group, which met on the, I don't know the date of the that they met, but it was meeting number 7.
16th of January.
16th of January, was it? And there were proposals which we have scheduled here. Us Baptist Church, recommended £1,300. St Peter's Church, Dixton, recommend £3,500. Monmouthshire Meadows Group, recommended £597. Usk Memorial Hall, recommended £800. Caldecott Community Garden has been deferred for further information, and Rockfield Village Life Community Project has been recommended for £500. So those are the recommendations in front of us. Are there any comments, members? Okay, all in favour? Thank you, and that brings our meeting for this afternoon to an end. Thank you everyone for attending.